The courtroom was massive. Daewon had never seen anything like it in his entire life. The ceiling stretched so high above his head that he could barely see where it ended. Strange lights floated in the air, casting colors he did not have names for. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal that pulsed with a soft glow. All around him sat creatures from dozens of different worlds, each one stranger than the last. Some of the aliens had too many eyes. Others had no eyes at all. There were beings made of what looked like water, others that seemed to be just clouds of gas held together by force fields. A few looked almost human, but not quite right. Their proportions were off, or their skin was the wrong color, or they had extra joints in their arms. Daewon stood alone in the center of the room. His hands were bound in front of him with energy cuffs that hummed softly. 2 guards flanked him, their armor reflecting the strange light. They were tall, at least 8 feet, and their faces were hidden behind dark helmets. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him, studying him like he was some kind of specimen in a lab. The judge sat on a raised platform at the far end of the chamber. Chancellor Vexthra was not like anything Daewon had ever encountered. The being's body was made entirely of crystalline structures that shifted and changed shape constantly. Light passed through Vexthra in strange ways, bending and splitting into rainbow patterns. When the Chancellor spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, translated into perfect Korean by the chip implanted behind Daewon's ear. "Human pilot Daewon of Earth," the voice boomed through the chamber. "You stand accused of violating Galactic Law, Section 47, Paragraph 12. You entered protected space without authorization. You ignored multiple warnings to turn back. You endangered sensitive operations in the Forbidden Sector." Daewon wanted to speak, to defend himself, but his lawyer had told him to stay quiet. The lawyer was a small gray creature with 4 arms and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. It had cost Daewon every credit he had saved, and still the lawyer had told him there was almost no chance of winning. "The evidence is clear," Vexthra continued. "Your ship's logs show you received 17 separate warnings. You were told the area was restricted. You were ordered to leave. Instead, you continued forward. What do you have to say for yourself?" The lawyer nudged Daewon forward. He cleared his throat. His voice sounded small in the huge chamber. "I received a distress signal," Daewon said. "Someone was in trouble. The signal said there were survivors. I'm a rescue pilot. It's my job to help people who need it." A wave of sound swept through the courtroom. It took Daewon a moment to realize the aliens were laughing. The sound was wrong, like metal scraping on metal mixed with wind howling through caves. Vexthra's crystalline body flashed with what might have been anger. "There was no distress signal," the Chancellor said coldly. "Your sensors malfunctioned. This is a common problem with human technology. It is primitive and unreliable. You imagine the signal because your equipment failed you." "I know what I heard," Daewon insisted. "I have recordings. I can prove it." "Your recordings show nothing," Vexthra replied. "We have examined them. There is only static and interference. The Forbidden Sector generates natural electromagnetic pulses. These pulses can fool lesser systems into detecting false signals. This is why the area is restricted. It is dangerous for species with inferior technology." Daewon felt his jaw tighten. He had been flying ships since he was 16 years old. He knew his equipment inside and out. That distress signal had been real. But looking around the courtroom at all those alien faces watching him with what might have been pity, or might have been contempt, he realized the truth did not matter here. "The council will now vote," Vexthra announced. "All those who find the human guilty indicate now." Lights began to glow around the chamber. Daewon's translator chip fed him information, showing him the vote count. One by one, the judges voted. Most of them voted guilty without hesitation. A few abstained. Only one voted not guilty. Daewon looked toward that single dissenting vote. He saw a woman sitting in the lower tier of judges. She looked almost human, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes met his for just a moment, and he saw something there that might have been sympathy. The translator whispered her name, Judge Hayrin of the Terran Advocacy Council. "The vote is complete," Vexthra declared. 47 guilty, 12 abstentions, 1 not guilty. "Human pilot Daewon, you are hereby found guilty of all charges." Daewon felt his stomach drop. His lawyer made a small sound that might have been despair. "For your crime," Vexthra continued, "you are sentenced to abandonment on planet Kivros 9. The courtroom exploded with noise. Even the aliens who had voted guilty seemed shocked. Daewon's lawyer grabbed his arm with two of its four hands. That's a death sentence, the lawyer hissed. Kivros 9 is a Class X death world. Nothing survives there. This is excessive. I must protest. Your protest is noted and denied, Vexthra said calmly. The sentence is final. The human violated sacred law. He must face the consequences. Daewon barely heard the rest. His mind was reeling. He knew about death worlds. Every spacer did. They were planets so hostile that nothing could survive on them. The Galactic Council had catalogued thousands of them across the galaxy. They were used as dumping grounds for toxic waste or as natural prisons for the worst criminals. But Class X? That was the highest danger rating. Even automated drones usually failed within hours on Class X worlds. Judge Hayrin stood up. Her voice rang out across the chamber. Chancellor, I must object. This sentence is far too harsh for the crime. The human made a mistake, nothing more.
He should face imprisonment or exile, not execution.
Your objection is noted, Judge Hayrin, Vexthra replied. But you were outvoted. The majority has spoken. The law is clear. Trespass in the forbidden sector carries the maximum penalty. But Kivros 9, Hayrin pressed. That world has a 99.9% fatality rate. Even our most advanced reconnaissance drones last only 3 or 4 hours on its surface. The atmospheric composition alone will kill him in minutes. Vexthra's crystalline form seemed to grow brighter. Then the human should not have broken our laws. Perhaps his death will serve as a warning to other humans who think they can ignore galactic authority. Earth is a new member of our community. Its people must learn to respect the rules that govern civilized space. The guards pulled Daewon backward. He stumbled, his legs suddenly weak. This could not be happening. He had only been trying to help someone. Now he was going to die on an alien world, alone and forgotten. As they dragged him toward the exit, Daewon caught one last glimpse of Judge Hayrin. She was still standing, her face pale with anger or grief. Their eyes met again, and this time he was certain of what he saw there. She was sorry. She had tried to help him, and she had failed. The guards took him to a holding cell. It was small and white and featureless. They removed his energy cuffs and left him alone. Daewon sat on the hard bench and put his head in his hands. He thought about his family back on Earth. His mother, Youngsuk, who had cried when he told her he was becoming a rescue pilot. His sister Minna, who always teased him about being too stubborn for his own good. They would never know what really happened to him. They would just get a message saying he died in the line of duty. Hours passed. Maybe days. Daewon lost track of time in the white cell. Finally, the guards returned. They gave him a basic survival kit and his old flight suit. Nothing else. No weapons, no advanced technology, no communication equipment. You have 72 hours, one of the guards said. Its voice was mechanical, filtered through its helmet. After that, if you are still alive, a recovery team will attempt to retrieve your body for burial. Do you understand? Daewon nodded slowly. 72 hours. 3 days. They were not even pretending he might survive longer than that. They walked him through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made no sense. Finally, they reached a launch bay. In the center sat a small pod, barely large enough for one person. It looked old and battered, like something pulled from a scrapyard. Get in, the guard ordered. Daewon climbed into the pod. The interior was cramped and smelled like oil and rust. The controls were ancient, the kind of manual systems he had only seen in museums. A small screen flickered to life, showing him a view of the planet below. Kivros 9 hung in space like a wound. Its surface was a mix of angry reds and blacks with swirling clouds of purple and green. Lightning flashed constantly through the atmosphere, great arcs of energy that could probably fry a ship's systems in seconds. Daewon could see massive storm systems that covered entire continents and mountain ranges that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. The hatch sealed shut with a hiss. Daewon heard the clamps release. Then he was falling, dropping away from the station toward the nightmare world below. The pod shook violently as it hit the upper atmosphere. Alarms started screaming immediately. The temperature gauge spiked into the red zone. Daewon gripped the control stick with both hands, trying to keep the pod steady as it plunged through layers of poisonous clouds. Lightning struck the pod's hull. The lights flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. The pod spun wildly, tumbling end over end. DW. Pain brought Daewon back to consciousness. His head throbbed with every heartbeat. His ribs ached when he tried to breathe. He opened his eyes slowly. blinking against harsh light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The pod had landed on its side. The viewport was cracked but not broken. Through it, Day-One could see a landscape that looked like something from a nightmare. The sky was a bruised purple color, streaked with bands of sickly green. 3 suns hung overhead, each one a different size and color. The light they cast made everything look wrong, like the world was slightly out of focus. He unbuckled the crash harness with shaking fingers. His survival kit had torn loose during impact and lay scattered across the pod's interior. Day-One gathered the pieces slowly. A basic medical kit, water purification tablets, a thermal blanket, a small multi-tool, a flare gun with 3 flares. Not much, but it was all he had. The pod's hatch was jammed. Day-One had to kick it 3 times before it finally popped open. Immediately the smell hit him. The air stank of sulfur and ozone and something else he could not identify. Something organic and rotten. He gagged but forced himself to take a breath. It burned. The air actually burned his lungs. Day-One coughed violently, his eyes watering. The atmospheric sensors on his suit were screaming warnings. Toxic levels of sulfur dioxide. High concentrations of methane. Trace amounts of chlorine gas. Any normal species would be dead within minutes of breathing this. But Day-One kept breathing. Each breath hurt a little less than the one before. His lungs adapted, filtering out the worst of the toxins. It was something humans were good at. Earth had not always been a paradise. Humans had evolved to survive in all kinds of terrible conditions. Deserts where the heat could kill. Mountains where the air was too thin to breathe. Jungles full of diseases and predators. Humans adapted. He climbed out of the pod carefully. Gravity grabbed him hard. It felt like someone had suddenly placed heavy weights on his shoulders. The planet's gravity was at least 50% stronger than Earth's. Every movement took effort. Day-One's muscles screamed in protest. The ground beneath his feet was strange. It looked like rock but felt slightly soft, like it was alive somehow. Dark red growths covered everything, spreading across the landscape like a rash. They pulsed slowly as if breathing. Day-One tried not to think about what they might be. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. The pod had crashed in a clearing surrounded by what might have been trees. They were tall and twisted, with trunks that seemed to be made of overlapping plates of black material. Instead of leaves, they had long tendrils that swayed in a wind Day-One could not feel. The tendrils were bright red at the tips, fading to purple near the base. A sound made him freeze. It was a clicking noise, rapid and rhythmic. It came from the trees. Day-One turned slowly, scanning the forest. At first he saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye. Something was moving through the undergrowth. Something big. He could see it pushing aside the strange plants, leaving a trail of disturbed vegetation. The clicking grew louder. More sounds joined it, coming from different directions. Day-One realized with cold certainty that he was surrounded. The first creature emerged from the trees and Day-One's breath caught in his throat. It stood about 5 feet tall at the shoulder, walking on 6 legs that ended in curved claws. Its body was covered in overlapping plates of dark chitin that reflected the strange light. The head was all wrong, with too many eyes arranged in a cluster above a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. When it opened that mouth, Day-One saw drops of something green and viscous dripping from the teeth. Acid. More of them appeared. 5, then 10, then too many to count easily. They circled the clearing, clicking to each other. Their eyes never left Day-One. He could see intelligence in those alien gazes. They were not just animals. They were hunters, and they were deciding the best way to take down their prey. Day-One's hand went to the flare gun. It was a pitiful weapon against creatures like these, but it was all he had. His mind raced. What had his survival instructor Bo-Ra taught him during training? Think like a human. Use what makes you different. Use what makes you dangerous. Fire. Humans had mastered fire thousands of years ago. It was one of the first tools that separated them from other animals. Most species in the galaxy had never needed fire. They had developed technology through other means. But humans? Humans had grown up with fire. They understood it in their bones. Day-One grabbed the thermal blanket from his survival kit. It was coated with a reflective material that was highly flammable. He wrapped it around a piece of debris from the pod, creating a makeshift torch. Then he pulled out the multi-tool and used its spark function. The blanket caught immediately, burning with a bright orange flame. Day-One held it up high, waving it at the creatures. They stopped clicking. Their bodies tensed. Some of them took a step back. Good. They did not like fire. Maybe they had never seen it before. Maybe their world had never produced anything that burned like this. Day One took a step forward, thrusting the torch at the nearest creature. It scrambled backward, hissing, "That's right," Day One shouted. His voice sounded strange in the alien atmosphere. "I'm a human. We're the species that learned to control fire. We're the species that climbed to the top of the food chain on a Deathworld. You want a piece of me? Come on!" The creatures hesitated. Day One could see their confusion. He advanced again, swinging the torch in wide arcs. The flames crackled and hissed. Some of the nearby plants caught fire, adding to the blaze. The creatures clicked frantically to each other, then began to retreat into the forest. Within minutes, they were gone. Day One stood alone in the clearing, breathing hard, the torch still burning in his hand. He had survived his first encounter with Kivros 9's wildlife. But he knew they would be back. Predators always came back. He needed shelter, somewhere defensible, somewhere he could build a fire and keep it burning. Day One looked around and spotted a rocky outcropping about 100 yards away. There seemed to be an opening in the rock face, possibly a cave. Getting there took nearly an hour. The heavy gravity made every step a challenge. By the time he reached the cave entrance, Day One's muscles were burning with fatigue, but he forced himself to keep moving. Exhaustion could kill him just as surely as the local predators. The cave was deeper than he expected. Day One used the dying torch to explore, checking for any signs of animals or other dangers. The walls were covered in the same strange growths he had seen outside, but they did not seem immediately threatening. The cave opened into a larger chamber about 30 feet across. Perfect. He gathered debris from the pod and built a fire pit near the cave entrance. Getting the fire started was harder than expected. The atmosphere was wrong, with too much carbon dioxide and not enough oxygen. But Day One was patient. He adjusted his technique, creating better airflow, using materials that burned hotter. Finally, flames caught and held. With the fire providing light and warmth, Day One turned his attention to water. His body was already dehydrated from breathing the dry atmosphere. The purification tablets would only help if he could find something to purify. He needed to explore. The sound of running water led him to a stream about 50 yards from the cave. The liquid was clear but had a faint purple tint. Day One's sensors said it was loaded with minerals and organic compounds that would be toxic to most species. But he remembered what Bora had taught him. Human kidneys were remarkably efficient. They could filter out toxins that would kill other species. He used his thermal blanket scraps to create a basic filtration system, layering cloth to remove the largest particles. Then he added the purification tablets and waited. 20 minutes later, he had something that might not kill him immediately. Day One took a small sip. It tasted awful, like metal and chalk mixed together. His stomach churned, but he kept it down. Over the next hour, he drank more, testing his body's ability to adapt. The nausea faded. His kidneys kicked into overdrive, processing the strange compounds. It was working. Food was the next problem. Day One had no rations. The survival kit did not include any. They had not expected him to need them. 3 days, they said. 72 hours and he would be dead. But Day One was not planning to die. He explored the area around the cave, looking for anything edible. He found clusters of fungus growing on dead wood. They glowed faintly in the dim light. His sensors said they were full of proteins and complex carbohydrates. They were also mildly toxic, not extremely toxic. Day One remembered learning about human evolution, about how humans had learned to eat foods that were poisonous to other animals, about how cooking could break down toxins and make food safe. He gathered some of the fungus and brought it back to the cave. He roasted the fungus over the fire, watching as it changed color from pale blue to dark purple. The heat broke down the toxic compounds, making them safer. When he finally tried a small piece, it did not taste too bad, like mushrooms mixed with charcoal. Not great, but he had eaten worse. The first night was the hardest. Day One sat by the fire, listening to sounds from the forest outside. Howls and screams and clicks, things moving in the darkness, creatures hunting. Several times he saw eyes reflecting the firelight from just beyond the cave entrance, but nothing attacked. The fire kept them at bay. 3 months had passed since the crash. Day One marked time by scratching lines into the cave wall. 91 days on a world that was supposed to kill him in 3. 91 days of learning, adapting, surviving. 91 days of proving them wrong. The cave had become his home. He had expanded it, using rocks and debris to create different sections. a sleeping area lined with dried plant matter that was almost comfortable, a storage area for food and water, a workshop where he crafted tools and weapons. The fire burned constantly in the main chamber, fed by a rotation of fuel he gathered every morning. Day-Wan had mapped the surrounding territory, learning which areas were safe and which were deadly. He knew where the six-legged hunters denned during the day. He knew which paths the larger predators used at night. He had learned to read the weather patterns, to predict when the electromagnetic storms would hit and when it was safe to venture far from shelter. His body had changed. Months of heavy gravity had built muscle he never knew he could have. His reflexes were sharper, honed by constant danger. His lungs processed the toxic atmosphere without trouble now. The water that had made him sick those first few days tasted almost normal. He was becoming part of this world, adapting to it in ways the Tribunal had never imagined possible. But survival was not enough. Day-Wan wanted to go home. He wanted to see his family again. He wanted to look Chancellor Vexthra in those crystalline eyes and show them what a human could do. For that, he needed to get off this planet. He needed to build a signal strong enough to reach beyond Kivros 9's interference. The pod's communication system had been destroyed in the crash, but Day-Wan had salvaged other components. Power cells, wiring, circuit boards. He had spent weeks studying them, trying to understand how they worked. His technical training helped, but this was alien technology, designed by species far more advanced than humanity. The breakthrough came when he discovered the crystalline deposits. They were everywhere on Kivros 9, growing in strange formations that jutted from the ground like teeth. At first, Day-Wan had avoided them, thinking they might be dangerous. But one day he noticed something odd. During the electromagnetic storms, the crystals glowed. They absorbed the energy somehow, storing it. An idea formed. If the crystals could store electromagnetic energy, maybe they could also transmit it. Maybe he could use them to amplify a signal. It was a long shot, but Day-Wan had nothing but time and determination. He gathered crystals carefully, learning which ones held the most energy. He experimented with different configurations, trying to create something that resembled an antenna. The work was slow and frustrating. Many of his early attempts simply exploded, releasing stored energy in bursts that nearly killed him. But Day-Wan was patient. He had learned patience on this world. He had learned that survival meant taking things one step at a time, solving one problem before moving to the next. Bora would have been proud. While he worked on the beacon, life on Kivros 9 continued around him. He had made an unexpected friend. It was one of the small creatures that lived in the rocks near his cave. About the size of a cat, it had 4 legs and a long tail. Its fur was a deep blue color, and it had large eyes that seemed to see everything. At first, the creature had just watched him from a distance. Then one day it had crept closer, drawn by the smell of the fungus Day-Wan was cooking. He had tossed it a piece, not expecting anything. But the creature had eaten it and come back the next day, and the next Day-Wan named it Jiwoo, after his childhood pet back on Earth. The name felt right somehow. Jiwoo became his companion, following him on his daily expeditions and alerting him to dangers he might have missed. The creature had senses adapted to Kivros 9 in ways Day-Wan's could never be. Together, they made a good team. On the 87th day, Day-Wan finally finished the beacon. It was crude, built from salvaged pod parts and crystalline formations he had shaped with primitive tools. It looked like something from a junkyard, but when he connected the power cells and flipped the activation switch, it hummed to life. The crystals glowed brighter than he had ever seen them. Energy pulsed through the makeshift antenna, following patterns Day-Wan had programmed using the pod's remaining computer core. It was broadcasting a simple repeating message. Human survivor on Kivros 9, coordinates attached. Send help, would it work? Day-Wan had no idea. The electromagnetic interference on this planet was stronger than anything he had ever encountered. His signal might not make it past the atmosphere, or it might be so garbled by the time it reached space that no one could understand it. But he had to try. Days passed. Then weeks. Day-Wan kept the beacon running, draining power cells and replacing them when they died. He maintained his routine, gathering food and water, defending his territory, expanding his settlement. Jiwoo stayed close, as if sensing his growing anxiety. On the 91st day, something changed. Jiwoo's behavior became agitated. The creature paced back and forth, making sounds Day-Wan had never heard before. Then he felt it too. A vibration in the air, a change in pressure. Something was coming. Day One grabbed his spear, a weapon he had crafted from pod metal and hardened wood. He moved to the cave entrance, scanning the sky. At first he saw nothing. Then through the purple clouds a shape descended, a ship. Not a tribunal vessel with its clean lines and crystalline construction. This was something different. Rough and patched together, bristling with mismatched parts. A smuggler's ship. Day One recognized the type. They were common in the outer systems, operated by people who did not care much for galactic laws. Exactly the kind of people who might respond to a distress signal from a forbidden world. The ship landed in the clearing where Day One's pod had crashed months ago. He approached carefully, Jiwoo trotting at his heels. The ship's hatch opened with a hiss of hydraulics. A figure emerged, humanoid but clearly not human. Too tall, with arms that hung past the knees and skin that had a faint green tint. The alien's eyes went wide when they saw Day One. The translator implant crackled to life, picking up the being's shocked words. "You're alive. You're actually alive. Do you know what the odds of that are?" Day One smiled. It felt strange using those muscles after so long. "My name is Day One. I'm the human who was sentenced to die here. And yes, I know exactly what the odds were." The alien introduced himself as Tae Yang, captain of the salvage vessel Lucky Fortune. He had picked up the distress signal 3 weeks ago and almost ignored it. Nobody survived on Kivros 9. It was a known fact, but curiosity had won out, and maybe the chance to salvage something valuable from a crashed pod. "I was expecting to find a body," Tae Yang admitted, staring at Day One like he was seeing a ghost. "Maybe some intact equipment I could sell. Not a living human, and definitely not all of this." He gestured at the settlement Day One had built around the cave. The water filtration system, the defensive barriers, the small garden where Day One had managed to cultivate some of the native plants. It was not much by civilized standards, but on a Class X Deathworld it was nothing short of miraculous. "How long have you been here?" Tae Yang asked. 91 days, Day One replied. "They gave me 72 hours before corpse recovery. I decided to exceed expectations." Tae Yang's laugh was harsh and surprised. "The tribunal is not going to like this. You were supposed to die. Your death was supposed to send a message to Earth." "I know," Day One said quietly. "That's why I need to go back. I need them to see what they failed to kill. I need them to understand what it means to sentence a human to a death world." Tae Yang studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll take you. But you should know, this is going to cause problems. Big problems. There are people who wanted you dead. People with power and influence." "Good," Day One said. "Let them have problems. I've had nothing but problems for 3 months. It's their turn." They spent the next few hours loading Day One's belongings onto the ship. He brought his tools, his weapons, samples of the plants and minerals he had learned to use. He brought documentation he had kept, scratching notes onto pieces of pod hull about everything he had learned. And he brought Jiwoo, who seemed happy enough to explore this new environment. Before they left, Day One took one last look at the cave that had been his home. The fire was still burning in the main chamber. He had kept it alive for 91 days through storms and attacks and dark nights when he thought he might not see another sunrise. Now he was leaving it behind, but he was not leaving empty-handed. He was taking knowledge, experience, proof that humans could survive anything if they were stubborn enough to refuse to die, proof that the tribunal had made a terrible mistake. The Lucky Fortune lifted off smoothly, its engines roaring as it climbed through the toxic atmosphere. Day One watched Kivros 9 fall away below them, the crimson jungles and black mountains growing smaller. The planet had tried to kill him in 100 different ways, and he had beaten it. Tae Yang had already sent messages ahead alerting his contacts. Word would spread fast. A human had survived Kivros 9, the impossible had happened. By the time they reached the tribunal station, everyone would know. Day One sat in the cargo hold, Jiwoo curled up beside him. He thought about what he would say to Vexithra, what he would say to the whole council. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. A human had survived Kivros 9. Impossible. Unprecedented, terrifying. Within days, every news network in civilized space was running the story. Some called it a hoax. Others called it a miracle. But nobody could ignore it. Myung-hee was an independent journalist who specialized in stories the mainstream media ignored. She had been following Daewon's case since the trial, documenting what she saw as a miscarriage of justice. When Tai Yang contacted her with proof that Day One was alive, she knew she had the story of a lifetime. She met them at a neutral station 3 days from the tribunal headquarters. Tai Yang had suggested keeping quiet until they arrived, but Day One had refused. He wanted the tribunal to know he was coming. He wanted them to have time to think about what they had done. Myung-hee's cameras captured everything. Daewon's muscular frame hardened by months of heavy gravity, the scars on his hands from crafting tools and fighting predators. Ji-woo, the alien companion that followed him everywhere. The samples he had brought from Kivros 9, proving beyond doubt that he had not just survived but thrived. "Tell me," Myung-hee said, her recording devices floating around them. "What was it like? How did you survive when every expert said it was impossible?" Day One thought about his answer carefully. "They made 2 mistakes," he said finally. "First, they assumed human fragility based on their own standards. We look weak compared to many species. We don't have natural armor or claws or poison, but we have something better. We adapt, we're stubborn. We refuse to die. And the second mistake? They forgot that Earth is a death world too," Daewon continued. "Not as extreme as Kivros 9, but deadly enough. Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. We learned to fight back. We learned to use fire, to make tools, to work together. Every human carries that legacy in their genes." The interview went viral. Within hours, it had been viewed billions of times across thousands of worlds. Species that had dismissed humanity as insignificant newcomers suddenly started paying attention. The humans were not weak. They were Deathworlders. They were dangerous. Chancellor Vexthra tried to suppress the story, claiming it was fabricated. But Myung-hee had too much evidence. She had scans showing Daewon's biological adaptations to Kivros 9's environment. She had samples of the beacon he had built, technology that the tribunal's own scientists said should not have worked. She had Ji-woo, a creature that could only have come from that forbidden world. By the time the Lucky Fortune docked at the tribunal station, crowds had gathered. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all wanting to see the human who had defeated a Class X death world. Some held signs supporting Daewon. Others protested, claiming he must have cheated somehow. Security forces struggled to maintain order. Judge Hyren was waiting at the docking bay. She looked older than Daewon remembered, her face lined with stress. When she saw him step off the ship alive and healthy, her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to stop them," she said quietly. "I voted against the sentence. I argued that it was excessive, but I was outvoted." "I know," Daewon replied. "I saw you vote. Thank you for trying. The council is in emergency session," Hyren continued. "They're trying to decide what to do about you. Some want to dismiss the charges and apologize. Others want to arrest you for returning without permission." Daewon's smile was cold. "Let them try. I'm not afraid of the tribunal anymore. I survived Kivros 9. What can they possibly do to me that's worse than that?" The council chamber was packed when Daewon entered. Every seat was filled with more beings standing in the aisles. Cameras floated everywhere, broadcasting to billions of viewers. This was not just a trial anymore. It was a galactic event. Chancellor Vexthra sat on the raised platform, the crystalline body pulsing with agitated colors. The other judges looked nervous, whispering among themselves. They had expected a corpse to deal with, not a living, breathing human who had turned their death sentence into a survival story. "This session is now in order," Vexthra announced. The voice was strained, lacking the confident authority from before. "We are here to address the unprecedented situation of human pilot Daewon, who was sentenced to Kivros 9 and has somehow returned alive." "Somehow?" Daewon called out. His voice carried through the chamber, strong and clear. "There's no somehow about it. I survived because I'm human. Because my species learned to survive on a death world long before we reached the stars." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Vexthra's crystalline form flickered dangerously. "You were sentenced to death for violating sacred law. The fact that you survived does not change your guilt." "No," Daewon agreed, "but it changes everything else. You sentenced me to Kivros 9 thinking I would die within 72 hours. You wanted to make an example of me. You wanted to show Earth that humans had to respect galactic authority." He walked forward, approaching the platform. Guards moved to stop him, but Hyren waved them back. Daewon activated a holodisplay he had brought with him, showing footage from his time on Kivros 9. "Hunting, building, thriving. You thought I was fragile. Day One continued. You measured me against your own species and found me wanting. But you forgot something important. Humans didn't evolve in safe environments. We didn't develop civilization on peaceful garden worlds. We come from Earth, a planet with predators that could tear us apart, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, weather that could freeze or burn or drown us. The holo display showed him fighting off the six-legged hunters, using fire, creating tools, adapting to conditions that would kill most species within minutes. We learned to fight back, Day One said. We learned to use what made us different, what made us dangerous. We mastered fire when other species were still afraid of it. We learned to make tools to think ahead, to plan and adapt and refuse to give up. That's what makes humans special, not strength or speed or natural weapons. Stubbornness, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. He placed samples on the evidence table, minerals from Kairos 9 that he had learned to use, preserved specimens of plants he had made edible, water filtration schematics he had developed, and the beacon, the impossible device he had built from scraps and crystals. Your scientists said this shouldn't work, Day One said, pointing at the beacon. They said the electromagnetic interference was too strong. They said it was impossible to send a signal through Kairos 9's atmosphere. But I built it anyway, because humans don't care much about impossible. We just care about getting the job done. Vexithra tried to regain control. Your survival, while remarkable, does not address the original crime. You violated protected space. You ignored direct orders to turn back. What do you have to say about that? Day One's expression hardened. I followed a distress signal. I have proof. The signal was real, not a malfunction. And I know why you don't want anyone investigating that sector. He activated another display, showing navigation logs he had recovered from his pod's damaged memory core. Data he had spent weeks reconstructing during the long voyage back. The logs showed the distress signal clearly. They also showed something else. Energy signatures consistent with mining operations. Unauthorized mining operations in a supposedly protected area. You weren't trying to protect the sector, Day One said quietly. You were trying to hide what you were doing there. Illegal mining. You sentenced me to death to silence a witness, to make sure nobody would investigate too closely. The chamber erupted in chaos. Judges shouted questions. Spectators called for investigations. Cameras zoomed in on Vexthra's crystalline form, which was now pulsing with colors that the translator interpreted as fear and rage. These accusations are baseless, Vexthra bellowed. This human is lying to save himself. Then let's investigate, Hayren said, standing up. Her voice cut through the noise. Let's send a team to the forbidden sector. Let's verify the human's claims. If he's lying, we'll know. If he's telling the truth, then this council has committed a grave injustice. Other judges began to agree. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. The scandal was too public to suppress. Vexthra tried to argue, but the momentum had shifted. The council voted, and this time the majority supported investigation. As the chamber descended into arguments about procedure and oversight, Day One stepped back. He had done what he came to do. He had shown them the truth. He had proven that humans were not to be underestimated. The rest was up to them. Jiwoo pressed against his leg, sensing the tension. Day One reached down and scratched behind the creature's ears. We did it, he whispered. We showed them. Judge Hayren approached him as the session was called to recess. You've changed everything, she said. The council will never look at humanity the same way again. Neither will the galaxy. Good, Day One replied. Maybe next time they'll think twice before sentencing someone to a death world, especially if that someone is human. The investigation took 3 weeks. Teams were sent to the forbidden sector, escorted by independent observers to ensure fairness. What they found confirmed everything Day One had claimed. Unauthorized mining operations run by companies with direct ties to members of the Galactic Council. Equipment that had been operating for years, extracting valuable minerals that should have been protected. Chancellor Vexthra was arrested on charges of corruption, conspiracy, and attempted murder through judicial misconduct. The crystalline being's protests meant nothing in the face of overwhelming evidence. Other council members were implicated as well, their careers ending in disgrace as the scandal grew. The Crystalline Collective, Vexthra's home government, withdrew from the tribunal in shame. They issued formal apologies to Earth and to Day One personally. It was not enough to undo what had been done, but it was a start. Judge Hayren was appointed interim chancellor while the council reorganized. Her first official act was to void Day One's sentence and clear his record completely. Her second act was to propose new regulations protecting the rights of species from Deathworlds. The motion passed unanimously, but the real changes went far beyond politics and regulations. Day One's survival had fundamentally shifted how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before, humans had been seen as weak newcomers barely worth noticing. Now they were Deathworlders, survivors. Dangerous Kivros 9 was officially reclassified. It was no longer an uninhabitable Class X Deathworld. The new designation read, Extreme Environment, Human Survivable. It was a small change in wording that meant everything. The galaxy had been forced to acknowledge that humans could live where nothing else could. The survival manual Day One had written, during his time on Kivros 9, became required reading for Galactic Rescue Services. His techniques for adapting to hostile environments, for using primitive technology when advanced systems failed, for thinking like a human instead of relying on superior equipment. Other species studied his methods, trying to understand how someone could do the impossible. His settlement designs were analyzed by engineers from 100 worlds. They wanted to know how he had built a functional base using only salvaged parts and local materials, how he had created water filtration without proper equipment, how he had defended against predators using nothing but fire and simple weapons. The answers seemed obvious to any human, but revolutionary to species that had never needed to struggle for survival. Earth's status in the galactic community changed overnight. Before Day One's trial, humanity had been treated as junior members, expected to follow rules they had no part in making. Now other species approached Earth with caution and respect. Trade offers flooded in, alliance proposals, requests for human advisors and trainers. Bora, the survival instructor who had trained Daiwan years ago, found herself suddenly famous. Her training programs, which had been considered too harsh by many galactic standards, were now in high demand. Species that had never needed to learn survival skills wanted their people trained by humans. Bora's academy expanded rapidly, opening branches on dozens of worlds. Day One himself became something of a celebrity, though he did not particularly enjoy it. Everywhere he went, beings wanted to meet him, to shake his hand or whatever equivalent their species had. They wanted to hear stories about Kivros 9. They wanted to know what it was like to be human. After the dust settled, Day One took some time for himself. He returned to Earth for the first time in over a year. The journey home felt strange after everything that had happened. He was not the same person who had left. His mother, Young-suk, met him at the spaceport. She had aged in the time he was gone, new lines around her eyes and gray in her hair. When she saw him step off the transport, Jiwoo padding beside him, she burst into tears. "I thought I'd lost you," she said, holding him tight. "When the news came about the sentence, I thought you were dead. Then the reports started coming in about your survival, and I couldn't believe it. My stubborn son, too mean to die even on a death world." Day One hugged her back, feeling the weight of everything he had been through. "I had to come back," he said quietly. "I had to show them they were wrong about us, about humans." His sister Minna was waiting at their mother's house. She looked him up and down, taking in the muscle he had gained, the scars, the confident way he moved. Then she grinned. "You always were too stubborn to die," she said, echoing their mother's words. "Remember when you were 12 and fell off that cliff? You broke your arm but still climbed all the way back up to prove you could do it." "I remember," Day One replied. "Mom grounded me for a month." "You deserved it," Young-suk said, but she was smiling. "You've always been like this, never accepting limits, never giving up. I suppose it was only a matter of time before you applied that stubbornness to surviving an alien death world." They spent a week together, just being family. Day One told them stories about Kivros 9, though he left out the most terrifying parts. He introduced them to Jiwoo, who charmed them both within hours. They showed him how Earth had changed in his absence, how humans were now treated with new respect by visiting aliens. But Day One knew he could not stay. There was too much work to do. Too many people who needed to learn the lessons he had learned on that distant world. He said goodbye to his family with promises to visit more often. Then he returned to space, this time not as a condemned criminal but as humanity's ambassador for frontier survival. Judge Hayren had offered him an official position with the tribunal, but Day One had refused. He did not want to be part of their bureaucracy. Instead, he started his own program, a training initiative that taught species across the galaxy how to survive in hostile environments. how to adapt when technology failed, how to think like a human. Taeyang became his primary transport, the lucky fortune carrying them from world to world. The work was rewarding in ways Day One had never expected. He taught aliens how to start fires, how to purify water, how to build shelter from natural materials. Skills that humans took for granted, but that seemed magical to species that had always relied on advanced technology. He also worked with other humans who wanted to explore the galaxy's dangerous places. Deathworlds that had been considered off-limits were now being settled by human colonists. They sought Day One's advice on everything from dealing with toxic atmospheres to defending against alien predators. He helped them understand that the skills humans had developed on Earth were not just survival tricks. They were a fundamental part of what made humanity special. Jiwoo was always at his side, a living reminder of where he had been and what he had overcome. The creature had adapted to life aboard the Lucky Fortune surprisingly well, becoming something of a mascot for Day One's program. Students loved Jiwoo, and the creature seemed to enjoy the attention. 2 years after his return from Kairos 9, Day One received an interesting message. A group of scientists wanted permission to study the planet more thoroughly. They wanted to understand how the ecosystem worked, what made it so deadly, and whether humans could actually colonize it permanently. Day One agreed to guide the expedition. Returning to Kairos 9 felt strange. The planet that had tried so hard to kill him now seemed almost welcoming. He led the scientists to his old cave, showing them the settlement he had built. Much of it was still intact, preserved by the planet's harsh conditions. The fire pit was cold now, but Day One could still remember the warmth it had provided during those long nights. The tools he had crafted still hung on the walls. The water filtration system still functioned. It was like visiting a museum of his own survival. "You built all of this alone?" one of the scientists asked. A being with 4 eyes and tentacles instead of hands, using only primitive materials. "I had help," Day One replied, scratching Jiwoo behind the ears. "And I had training. But mostly I had something to prove. To the tribunal. To the galaxy. To myself." The expedition spent 3 months on Kairos 9, protected by human-designed equipment and guided by Day One's knowledge. They discovered that the planet was actually teeming with life, much of it undocumented. They found resources that could be valuable if properly harvested. They confirmed what Day One had always suspected. Kairos 9 was dangerous, but it was not impossible. When they left, Day One took one last look at the cave. He would probably never live there again, but it would always be part of him. It was the place where he had learned what humans were truly capable of. The place where he had refused to die. Years passed. Day One continued his work, training thousands of beings from hundreds of species. He became a legend in his own time, the human who survived the unsurvivable. His name was mentioned alongside the great explorers and pioneers of history, but he never forgot the lesson he had learned on Kairos 9. Survival was not about having the best technology or the strongest body. It was about refusing to give up. It was about adapting to whatever challenges came your way. It was about being stubborn enough to keep breathing when everything around you said you should be dead. That was the human way. That was the legacy of Earth. And thanks to Day One, the galaxy would never forget it. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Never underestimate a species born from a death world. They don't just survive impossible odds. They transform those odds into opportunities.